Hey everybody, it's Professor Hanlon coming to you from my office here at the State University of New York at Fredonia. Today I want to talk to you about rosining the bow and keeping the bow hair healthy. I wore my Beethoven shirt because when we play Beethoven we certainly need our rosin situation to be good. So anyone that's done some professional playing or unprofessional playing, or any kind of playing I should say, knows that this $10 to $15 piece of sap will be the difference between you having a satisfying performance experience or not. It's really, really important that the rosin situation be on point. So we're going to talk about, of course, rosining the bow, but first I think it's important to talk about keeping the bow hair healthy and sort of how, I'd like to share with you how I've developed a way of just having a consistent start to the day regarding how I take care of the bow and the bass too, a little bit. The strings anyway. So I'll just show you briefly. I've got my sort of Bill Nye the Science Guy project table here. These are all the different supplies we're going to be chatting about today. And that's going to, of course, start with the bow. Okay, you got your bow ready to go. So I always start by tightening the bow. And this is a little bit of a sidebar. How tight should the bow be? On some level, that's a little bit of a flexible decision, depending on what kind of music you're playing and the weather and things like that. But I feel in general that the bow should be a little bit on the tighter side. I think that helps it to have its nice natural spring and to sort of get the power to the bass without sort of losing the power in the flex of the hair if it's too loose. But of course, we always want to make sure that the bow maintains its camber, right? That's this curve across the bow like this. We always want to make sure that it has its camber. If it's totally straight across, it's just not good for the bow or the hair, and it won't really play that comfortably either. So that's the first thing you need to know, is make sure you have your bow tightened to start out. Now, I like to use this fine-tooth comb to start, and I use the finer side. This is one of those combs that has a sort of graduated thickness on the tines or whatever you'd call them. And I like to have really be right down here in the thinner side. And so what I do is I sort of brace the bow against my hip here, against my stomach, and I take the bow and take the comb and insert it into the bow here, okay, and then move from the frog to the tip. Do this about 10 times. There you go, 10 times through. Now, some people like to use a toothbrush, and I have not found that to be most effective for me because I think it takes out too much rosin. The point of this is not to take the rosin out, it's to sort of break up what's in there if it's sort of coagulated overnight or since you last played, and also to remove the dust that is created from older dry rosin. And actually, to help with that, little trick I picked up from Jeff Turner, I like to use this towel here and just go over the towel 2 times. That's the first thing I do in the day, and that tends to get the bow, at least you're starting from the same place every day, which can be really helpful. We of course know that the rosin and the bow hair even is all very much affected by humidity, temperature, and so we want to just be trying to find as much consistency as we can. Next thing I do is I take this copper scrubber here. Hang on, let me just show you. I've got a package of these actually. You can see they're Libman, and you can buy these at any grocery store in the cleaning aisle. They're for pots and pans, right? But it's a copper scrubber, and I find that on the strings of the bass, of course, the rosin will tend to build up as you play, and after a certain point, it can be a problem, be in the way too much, right? So we use the copper scrubber to get after the strings a little bit and get that rosin cleaned off. It's nice because the copper is, of course, softer than the steel winding on the strings, and you won't be in any danger of tearing the strings up or anything like that, okay? But it, of course, does a great job removing that excess rosin, which is really good. So those are the first things I do, and then I try to play a little while. Do my warm-up, do my scales or technical exercises, and just let the bow settle in a little bit after that, okay? So then, at a certain point, we'll of course all need to rosin the bow. So let's talk a little bit about that. Now, For most applications, I do recommend Pop's rosin. Um, I I think it is important to note, though, that uh, Mike Griffin, who plays in the Rochester Philharmonic, a good friend of mine, made my bass, tremendous musician and craftsman. He always talks about rosin and said, "There's no answer. There's just whatever's working that day," and I really think that's true in many ways. Right now, I'm not using Pop's rosin on my own bow. I've been using some Carlson to start the day, and then switching over to some Colstein Soft. That's been working best. Um, I do tend to start with Carlson all year long, just a couple swipes at the beginning of the day. It's a Swedish rosin. It's not quite as sticky, and it seems to just um, sort of coat the hair and maybe set up a nice base, no pun intended, rosin for the stickier stuff, whether it's Pops or Colstein Soft or whatever you may use. Um, but for most applications, Pops will be your most consistent bet. So if you're teaching the private students or K to 12, I think having Pops is the way to go. Now, that being said, it does dry out after a while. I would say most applications, after 6 months, you should really replace your rosin. If you're playing professionally, I would say, or taking auditions or whatever in music school, I would say more often than that, even maybe every couple of months is even better. So that's kind of what I like to recommend for most people, most situations. Couple notes about the Pops rosin here. If you've ever seen it before, you'll know that it comes in a white paper cup, right? Kind of looks like one of those ketchup containers at a fast food joint. I take it right off. I really have found that it will suck the moisture out of the rosin and or get sucked into the rosin and just kind of wreck the cake pretty quickly. So I take it right off. Now, the problem with that, of course, as you can imagine, is that it gets stuck inside the container, right? Because there's nothing between it and the sides of the container. But what I found is if you take the rosin container and you do that, kind of squeeze opposite sides like that, and then give it a couple good pushes on the bottom, usually it'll come out for you pretty quick. There's only been a few times, maybe playing outside or something like that, when it's really given me a hard time. And then you can always leave it on the lid, and then you can just grab it and go if you are playing outside. So yeah, this stuff melts at a really pretty low temperature, about 78 degrees, I think it is. So it can get away from you on a hot day. So that's my main thought regarding which type of rosin and how to store it. Now let's talk about how to put it on the bow. This really matters, okay? How you put it on the bow really matters. And how much you put on the bow really matters too, of course, and that will change a little bit depending on which situation that you're in. I know when I was a younger player, definitely used way too much rosin. It's really fun for fortissimo, but other than that, you're kind of out of luck. And so it's and it can really affect the sound too. You can get a real whistly kind of sound in it. Again, Beethoven 5, terrific, for the trio. But other than, you have to be, of course, more musically flexible than that. So I've found that if you're dealing with a bow that's never seen rosin before, like not a bow, but maybe new hair, or a bow that's been dry for a long time, you may want to give it about 6 swipes to start. And then once you have it sort of set up, I like to really maintain about 2 at a time. That has worked out okay for me. As long as the rosin's healthy, the bow hair is healthy, about 2 swipes at a time should be okay. So let's talk about how to apply it. I have a pretty specific method with this. I found that it works really pretty well. I like to hold the rosin here between my ring finger and my thumb on my left hand, okay? And actually, I find that you want to make sure that there is a corner of the rosin connecting with the bow hair. You don't necessarily want to be on it flat, okay? You want to be on the corner. And then you can see I got this sort of backwards peace sign, and that behaves as a guide, okay? You start near the frog and move quickly and lightly towards the tip, like that. And you want to go on the quicker side because you want to heat the rosin up a little bit, allow it to melt to the hair, and also sort of get a nice even distribution across it, okay? Sometimes people ask me, how do you know if there's enough rosin on the bow? And again, I think that is situational. If you're playing a solo box suite in a recital, you may not need as much. If you're playing, a concert where you're doing I don't know, Fingal's Cave. I just did this concert. Fingal's Cave, Beethoven 5, and St. Paul's Suite. We did this in Erie. Huge program, right? And everything was big and go for it, you know. And so I had the bow really rosined up that day, right? So you want to be flexible that way. I think the best way to check it out is if you have your arm weight relaxed and everything, you set the bow down on the strings with nice flat bow hair for, you know, low orchestral range, full sound, and you can just pull to the side without really having to push down at all or pull into the bass or anything like that. You can just go sideways and you get a nice natural sounding attack. I think that's how you know if you have enough rosin or not. I'm just going to wrap this up by going back to what Mike said, which I think is great. There's no answer. There's just whatever's working that day. I think that's really true. So you can find my email on the Fredonia website. Feel free to send me a note if you have any further questions about this. And in the meantime, take care.